It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Alright, I gotta admit something. This week, as I close out the 70s, I'm picking one just for me. Yes, this is the 1971 sci-fi horror movie, Zaat, also known as Bloodwaters of Dr. Z. So why is this one for me? Well, this is a pretty silly movie. I mean, to be honest with you, it's a pretty bad movie. And, this is one of the examples of a movie that became famous thanks to appearing in a late season episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. And I've long said that some movies that got featured on MST3K earned a not so fair reputation as a bad movie. Now, don't get me wrong. Most of the movies they featured were pretty bad movies, but not all of them were all that terrible. Just fairly low budget and slightly more amateurish than the polished, better movies that would have come out and been released in the same genres in the same era that those movies that they featured would have come out in. But Zaat / Bloodwaters of Dr. Z, this is a bad movie. And I'll talk a lot more about that sort of badness later, because I do think this movie is kind of charming in that badness. But this is a product of Don Barton, a Jacksonville, Florida resident who raised about $75,000 to film and make prints of this movie. And it was filmed over the course of a single month in 1970 and used various spots in northern Florida, most notably Rainbow Springs, Green Cove Springs, and the Marine Mammal Park Marineland, which still operates to this day. But this movie is kind of the epitome of a regional film. No one in the movie is a famous person or had much of a career before or after this movie, at least in film. They might have been local actors or whatever. But they were certainly probably locals making this movie, and when released, it largely played in Florida and a few other southern states in the United States. So it would get picked up here and there under different titles like Bloodwaters of Dr. Z, as well as Attack of the Swamp Creatures. Note, the creatures are plural in that title when there are not actual multiple creatures in the movie, but that is the title it was under when it got spoofed and featured in an episode of Elvira. But it was MST3K that really brought this film to the most notoriety, which led to a passionate re-release by Don Barton riding high off of a cease and desist order against the Sci-Fi Channel when apparently Sci-Fi did not get the proper rights for Mystery Science Theater 3000 to do their episode. But later, in 2012, the movie got issued on DVD and Blu-ray. And I suppose that was about the time that it got another boost in notoriety when an early episode of Red Letter Media's Half in the Bag reviewed, talked about that movie. And that's a pretty great episode. And they talk about a lot of the things that you can like for its badness in this movie. So let's get into what this crazy movie is all about. So the movie begins with Dr. Kurt Leopold talking about the sargassum fish, sharks, the scorpion fish, walking catfish and the like, and how he plans to become like them to be able to conquer the universe. You heard that right. The world isn't enough for Dr. Leopold. He wants to conquer the universe as a fish man. But he talks about the formula he created, Zaat, or Z sub A and A sub T. And this stuff apparently has the properties to turn a human into a fish-like creature. And that's exactly what he does in his lab. He injects himself with the Zaat compound and then lowers himself into the tank of water in his lab. And that tank has like some radioactive stuff in it or whatever. But Dr. Leopold is successful in turning himself into a large amphibious creature with a big old snout for a mouth and something that resembles moss, giving him some fur features. He's surprised that he doesn't look like the catfish, but he still says he likes what he sees. And he plans to take a little squirt bottle of formula and spray it into the pond and local water supply near his lab. And this is some sort of radioactive stuff that is intended on making the walking catfish bigger. And I think he plans on using the walking catfish as something of an army of sorts, but it causes the walking catfish to basically migrate unnaturally across the various rivers, creeks, lakes, and ponds in Florida. And the stuff he introduced to the water supply also appears to make people sick later on in the movie as well. Now, step 3 in his big master plan is to start getting some revenge on the scientist that belittled and embarrassed him in the past. However, before he can really do that, he spots a hottie deciding to camp by a pond and do a little art. And he figures that he can earmark her for the plan to make a mate, and then he decides to now go and get that sweet, sweet revenge. He finds one of the scientists he wanted revenge on fishing on a lake with his family. He overturns their boat, slashes the guy's throat, and kills the other members of the family. While local marine biologist Rex Baker calls for some help in investigating the death of one of the guys and his family, as well as something he saw in the pond when he was trying to collect samples of fish that sure looked like some sort of fish guy monster. Zaat checks to make sure that blonde hottie's still camping out by the pond before killing the other scientist that embarrassed him. So he keeps checking in on his potential mate. But the next day, Rex Baker greets 2 agents from an organization called INPIT. Don't ask me what INPIT stands for, I don't remember, but it's an investigative agency. And the 2 people that arrive are Walker Stevens and Martha Walsh. Stevens spots something that looked like a chemical burn on both of the dead men's wounds, and it's almost as if their wounds maybe also have some sort of resemblance of what maybe a walking catfish could do to his victims. They're just kind of throwing some words at the wall and to see what sticks for this movie's plot. But as they start their investigations, Zaat grabs that blonde hottie when she finally jumps into the pond for a swim and takes her back to his lab. And he puts her through the same process that made him into that big old green creature just the other day. But however, for some unknown reason, her struggling causes the equipment to malfunction, so it doesn't work on the girl. It only kind of puts some fishy scales on parts of her body, but she ultimately dies. Now, later that night, Rex, Walker, and Martha nearly capture Zaat, but he escapes. But they do get pictures of the creature that they can now basically share with the local population, realizing that there is indeed some sort of monster issue here. And so the sheriff begins evacuations for those who can, and suggests that for those who can't and must stay at home, they should lock their doors and keep their guns handy. To try again with the whole mate thing, Zaat decides to now focus on Martha. And the sheriff reveals that Leopold worked at the lab that INPIT also dug up some information on. And during the World War II, they were doing experiments with heavy water at this lab that Leopold worked at. The experiments turned out to cause that heavy water that they were experimenting with to become radioactive and did create some mutations in underwater life. And Walker thinks that whatever killed those people was maybe some sort of a mutation, but it also has to be fairly intelligent. As he says, he was fighting with something more than claws and teeth. And they haven't figured out yet that the creature is Leopold, who stole some canisters of the stuff that the group at the lab was working on that created those mutations. But Zaat starts a rampage of the few remaining people in town that didn't evacuate. He kills a teenage kid, and it looks like he needs to consume blood now to keep from feeling some sort of internal pain. Why that all of a sudden becomes part of the plot, it's never really explained, but Walker says, he now needs to satisfy some sort of biological need. But the next day, Walker, Rex, and the sheriff figure out a way to track the monster using his radioactive signature. And as they search for wherever the creature went, Martha stays behind to do some paperwork and eventually receives a report about Leopold's background and his discovery of the Zaat compound, and that he's got some pretty serious mental issues. And the sheriff figures that maybe old Doc Leopold would be the type of person to turn a man into a fish, and perhaps he turned himself into this creature that's going around killing things. Kind of crazy that he waits a few days to tell everybody this, but hey, whatever, man. So they go looking for him while Leopold himself goes looking for a mate, and he sneaks up on Martha, nabs her, and takes her back to his lab. Now, our other heroes get to Leopold's lab. Walker has to deal with a snake in the stream that kind of hobbles him, but the sheriff and Rex enter the lab where they see all of Leopold's crazy stuff and equipment. And as the sheriff tries to leave to radio to Walker, he runs right into Zaat, and the creature kills him. The same fate befalls Rex inside the lab as Zaat prepares Martha for transformation by injecting her with that formula and is about to put her into the tank when Rex interferes and dies after messing with Leopold's lab equipment. Instead of finishing Martha's transformation into a fish, Zaat decides instead to take some of those canisters of his Zaat juice to the ocean to release it. Martha follows in what appears to be some sort of a trance or something to join him in the water while the injured Walker watches on helplessly. And I think the ending of this movie might be one of the great mysteries of film history, because I can't really tell you anything that actually happened other than the good guys either lost or died, and Martha is maybe wanting to become a fish monster too. But let's talk about 3 things I adore about this silly Zaat flick. First, I gotta say that I kind of love how dopey Dr. Leopold is. Look, I don't want to necessarily comment on actor Marshall Grauer's looks or whatever, but he doesn't exactly cut a mean profile, if you know what I mean. He kind of looks like the weird guy who always rides the bus to the grocery store every day to buy a single item and returns home. He doesn't say anything to anyone. He doesn't look at anyone in the eye. He's just that weird guy that you see every day, and his trip to the grocery store is the only thing he lives for. And he hardly seems threatening. At least he seems able to be as much of a threat as he is able to comb his hair. No, seriously, the guy really needs a comb in this. His hair is insane. But anyway, whether it is intended or not, this guy is just a weird outcast who shuffles around, doesn't look particularly evil or scary. He's just some guy. Then he does indeed turn himself into a fish man, and it's not exactly what he expected. I'm not sure what he expected. I think he thought he would look just like a catfish. But he looks like a mossy monster with the big sucker for a mouth. He's just kind of stuck as an ugly bipedal amphibian of some sort. I mean, he's not even all that successful in his evil master plan. I mean, he plans to rule the universe as a giant green fish guy. I'm not sure I'd expect this guy to rule anything but a mop in the hallways of the local high school as he does the after hours cleanup. I mean, this is just one of those instances in which you just chuckle at the decisions made to make this guy our genetically superior villain guy. Second, the Zaat monster, sure is dumb looking, but boy do I love it. In some ways, it looks like something that would have appeared on Star Trek in the 60s or on Doctor Who in the 70s. It's this beefy costume that makes it somewhat clumsy for the actor who's wearing the suit. He looks like he's always about to bump into stuff, and sure enough, when he's thrashing about his lab, when his planned mate dies during the process of turning her into a fish monster, he nearly stumbles over all the stuff he just knocked over. So, there are scenes in which you can see the suit actor actually wearing tennis shoes. That's the kind of level we're working with. It's bad, but it's something that reconnects me to those inelegant rubber suits from those Star Trek or Doctor Who episodes I love so dearly. And I ain't gonna lie, whenever the Zaat monster is on screen, I'm also paying attention to the movie. The movie is too long. I mean, it's 100 minutes. There's no reason in the world for this movie to be 100 minutes. And any time that Zaat is not on screen, it's a snooze. It's really not that good of a movie. But damn it if that creature doesn't hold my attention every time he pops up. Third, okay, so the big reason why I love this movie is really thanks to the MST3K episode, but also because this movie is very charming in its silly, low-budget quality. It's clumsy. There are plot points that don't make a whole lot of sense. The movie drops you right into the plot that Dr. Leopold is seeking revenge. Why? He was embarrassed by others in the field of some sort of science. So he wants to prove that he can become a fish man and plans to get revenge on them. It's also noted that Leopold might have been some allusions to him being either a Nazi or a Nazi sympathizer. Dr. Leopold is an alias, and I think the name that his original name is quite German sounding, and it might have been a situation where they were alluding to the fact that he might have been a Nazi sympathizer or something like that. But he certainly thinks fishmen could make a superior race. But it's also part Frankenstein too, because he wants to not just be a fish man, but he also wants a mate too, and tries to turn a couple of women into fish women. It's this sort of plot that is not just goofy, but incredibly fun. I mean, is there any discussion of how Zaat works? Nope, not really. Is there any real explanation of how Leopold was embarrassed by his contemporaries? Thin. They didn't want him to have human test subjects. So I'm going to still count that as a nope. But yeah, I mean, there was a little bit there that he wanted to do more tests than these guys stood in his way. But why does Leopold love fish? I mean, who knows? Did I just watch a musical interlude where a sheriff would ultimately lead a gaggle of singing hippies into a jail cell so that they could supposedly keep them safe from a fish man? I sure as hell did. I mean, what is the ending about, and why does Martha want to follow the monster into the sea? Who cares? Ultimately, that's the only thing you can say about this. I mean, this movie is bad, but it's the kind of bad that you invite your friends over for a bad movie night, drink some beers, and chuckle and laugh at, but never really hate in any way. It's inoffensive in that way. And it's why I love these types of movies. It's why I love doing this show. These types of small budget monster movies are just sometimes fun to watch. And I get the same feeling every time I watch Zaat or Bloodwaters of Dr. Z or Attack of the Swamp Creatures or whatever you want to call it. I call it a charming, good time. That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com, but don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Wednesday morning Film Seizure podcast and the Monday afternoon Monster Monday show at your favorite podcast providers. And we also upload the stuff to YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, we slide up the timeline for the final month featuring a specific decade. July is all about the 90s, and we kick things off with a sci-fi flick that had a massive footprint and was a major box office draw. 1997's Men in Black. Until next week, stay spooky.